So as we can see, ICP was launched with the aim of delivering a holistic upstream intervention to help at-risk children. So actually it adopts a many helping hands approach to provide platforms and opportunities for them to gain greater social mobility. So as I mentioned, let's move on to the next slide. I will share a story. And we all have heard about this story of the tortoise and the hare, right? How many of us have actually not heard about the story before? Anyone? Which version? Yes, well done, Vicky. Yeah. Today is really wonderful, as what Mayor has mentioned. We have been meeting each other online on Zoom. Today is really wonderful. We can really get to meet each other face to face. Yeah. So my version of the story, okay, goes like this. I mean, we hear about this story. We're all very familiar, with the story of the tortoise and the hare. So allow me to say the story again. Right? So once upon a time, the tortoise and the hare, had an argument about who was faster. So they decided to settle the argument with a race. So they agreed on a route, and they started off the race. The hare shot ahead very quickly, and he was far ahead of the tortoise. So he thought, he would sit down under a tree for some time and relax before continuing the race. So he sat under the tree and soon fell asleep. So the tortoise slowly overtook him and soon finished the race, emerging as the undisputed champion. The hare woke up and realized that he has lost the race. So what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that slow and steady wins the race. This is the version that we all grown up with. Correct? But there is a second part to the story. The hare was disappointed at losing the race, and he did some soul searching. He realized that he lost the race only because he had been overconfident, careless, and lax. So he challenged the tortoise to another race. The tortoise agreed. This time, the hare went all out and ran without stopping from start to finish. He won by several miles. The moral of the story? Fast and consistent will still beat slow and steady. Can we have the next slide, please? But the story doesn't end here. The tortoise did some thinking this time and realized that there is no way he can beat the hare in the race the way that it was currently formatted. He thought for a while and then challenged the hare to another race, but on a slightly different route. So the third race started. In keeping with his made commitment to be consistently fast, the hare took off and ran at top speed until he came to a river. The finishing line was a couple of kilometers on the other side of the river. The hare sat there wondering what to do. He couldn't cross the river, right? So in the meantime, the tortoise slowly came along, got into the river, swam to the opposite bank, continued walking, and finished the race. The moral of the story? Identify your core competency and work to your strengths. Wonderful version, right? But the story still hasn't ended. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so we move back to the earlier slide. Yeah. Okay, but the story still hasn't ended. The hare and the tortoise did some thinking together this time round. And both realized that the last race could have been run much better. So they decided to do the last race together, but to run as a team this time. So they started off, and this time the hare carried the tortoise to the riverbank. Then the tortoise took over and swam with the hare on his back. On the opposite bank, the hare again carried the tortoise, and they reached the finishing line together. They both felt a greater sense of satisfaction than they had felt earlier. Next slide, please. The moral of the story: it is good to be individually brilliant and to have strong core competency, like what we have here. 17 partners. We have all our own core competency and our strengths. But unless we are able to work in a team and harness each other's core competency, we will always perform below par, because there will always be situations at which we will do poorly and someone else does well. I really like this story. I really like this story because it embodies what we have been talking about in ICP. We don't compete against each other. We are competing against the situation. As what Meyer has earlier shared with us, issues are complex. There are a lot of needs out there. It is not about which social service is better. It is not about which school is better. It is about what we can do together, collaboratively, to address the situation. And pulling our resources together and working as a team will always beat individual performance. And that's what we are trying to do. But of course, it's easier said than done, right? How do we collaborate? And what is the definition of collaborate? Allow me to share with everybody the spectrum of collaboration. Next slide, please. Collaboration for impact. You know, if you look at all the C's, it starts from compete at the turf. We are all having our own individual turf. So, competition for clients, competition for resources, competition for partners and public attention. That's a very natural thing in a free market situation. Do we want to be as such? Definitely not. But can we move towards collaboration? We can. But what's the different stages? We usually move from compete to coexist. There is no systematic connection between the agencies, but we all agree to coexist. And of course, if you move up one stage higher, that's communicate. So we don't just coexist. You know, we have interagency information sharing and networking. I think we are all very used to that, right? Yeah, there's often a lot of networking. The information are shared. We get to hear about what, you know, each agency is doing. Those are communicate. But hearing information only is not about collaboration. To move towards cooperation, you know, often as needed, you know, there are informal interaction on activities and projects, you know, that people need to work together. That's cooperate. Okay? And after we are able to cooperate, we can actually also move on to coordinate, you know, yeah, how we align each other for greater outcomes. Yeah, and it can also mean co-location. I think the CCMC has actually done a good job, you know, to co-locate as well as to also coordinate. Now we move on to collaborate. You know, there's longer-term interaction based on shared mission, goals, tiered decision-makings, and resources. Ultimately, we want to move towards integrate, you know, having all these coming together, integrated programs, including planning, funding, you know, and sometimes even merging. But what we are seeing here in ICP model is the furthest end of collaboration, and that is collective impact. It's an alignment of common agendas and measures for a shared vision. Across all sectors, we don't just have the educators, we don't just have the social services, and for the longest time, I think we have been working in isolation. Although there are agencies, social services working very much together, but we have not been working across sectors. And that includes the grassroots. And this is what we are seeing the collective impact in ICP. We are working across the sectors, focusing on system change, and integration of services. As you can see at the bottom, the turf has shifted. A competition is very much guarding our turf. A collective impact is all about trust. And that's what this ICP is built on. Next slide, please. Now, the 5 conditions of collective impact. We talk about collective impact, but we must know what really is collective impact. Earlier in the video, we might have actually, an overview of what collective impact is, but the 5 main conditions are so crucial. Common agenda. All the participants must have, all of us must have a shared vision for change, including the common understanding of the problem. What is the problem? What is the situation that we are tackling? And a joint approach to solving it, through agreed upon action. We must have shared measurement, collecting the data and measuring results consistently across participants, measure the efforts, and ensure that the efforts remain aligned. And this is where we are very, very privileged that we have MSF coming in to help us with the shared measurements. We have our own expertise. The social work intervention component can be done by the social workers on the ground. But when it comes to measurements, very privileged that MSF is coming in to assist us. There must also be mutually reinforcing activities. All of us must be able to work together with one another. And our activities cannot be isolation. It's not just simply a coordination solution. It is collective impact where activities are mutually reinforcing. And I emphasize again, mutually reinforcing to achieve our common agenda. Continuous communication. We must have a very consistent and open communication across the many players to help to build trust. Ensure that we can really achieve and implement the things that we set up for. And very, very privileged that we have Pickery, coming up with that system for us to share the data and to share the information on the cases of the young people that we're working with and their family. And last but not least, the backbone support. Creating that whole collective impact requires a very strong backbone support, and we cannot thank People Association enough for being that backbone support, pulling all of us together. Next slide, please. So, as we can see, the ICP approach, it takes a village to raise a child, right? Next slide. But it is not just simply a collective impact model. There is also a collaborative leadership. Next slide, please. And if I may quote David and Carl, next slide, please, sorry. If you bring the appropriate people together in constructive ways with good information, they will create authentic visions and strategies for addressing the shared concern of the organization or community. So, next slide, thank you. Very quickly, I want to share this very, very, very important to me, very, very important concept of what is collaborative leadership. Oxford Leadership produced a white paper in 2016 explaining what is collaborative leadership. It's a shift from ecosystem to ecosystem. We all have heard about ecosystem, right? We are going to form an ecosystem, and that's what we are doing in ICP, forming an ecosystem. But collaborative leadership is that shift from ecosystem to ecosystem. What do I mean? Ecosystem talks about, it's about me, whereas our ecosystem is about us. An ecosystem is top-down approach, whereas our collaborative leadership is about influence, communication. We don't have independent silos anymore. We have aligned agility. We have no territory, but it's partnership. We move from power struggles in competition to mutual empowerment, and from self-interest to mutual support. From withholding information to joint knowledge development. I'm sure we have all experienced that for the existing partners. You know, we share information, we share about whatever that's going to come, and that is very, very helpful in tackling the situation that we want to address. And there is no blaming. An ego system always talks about blaming. It's never my fault. It's always other parties not doing their work. But in our model of collaborative leadership and ICP, we talk about mutual accountability. Very, very wonderful insight. And this is really what ICP is. No ego system, but an ecosystem. So very quickly, our ICP approach takes a village to raise a child. Next slide, please. Really are all these partners. And I just want to end off my last segment here, you know, with my hope. Can I have the last slide? You know, as I mentioned, this whole project would not be possible without the support of People Association as the backbone organization, of course, Northeast CDC, you know, as the aggregator of resources. I'm sharing this slide not to bring us through what this is, because I'm not doing justice to the person who developed this, because I don't have sufficient time. But I just want to use this opportunity to really, you know, appreciate and recognize that key person who managed to pull all of us together. We talk about collective leadership, and it's about everybody being a collective leader. And there is this person who really role model collective leadership, and that is actually Kai, Senior Directors from People Association, CPD. Kai, where are you? Kai, yes. Can we give Kai a big round of applause? Okay, reason because, you see, we all have our own competency, we all have our own expertise, but it takes somebody of influence to bring all of us together. And this really, this model, to me, is my hope, that it is not just for the people that we are serving now, but it could be a future model of tackling very complex issues in Singapore in terms to come. And as you can see, it's a very theoretical, oriented and well thought through model, putting into whatever we have discussed all along and we have implemented into this framework. I would not have the time to go through this together with all of us today, because it can consist of a whole workshop. But really, I want to attribute really this to Kai and her insight that she has created. And my hope is really that we can move beyond supporting vulnerable children and their families using ICP model to other complex issues that we are facing in Singapore. And that will really be a dream. And to scale up the ICP model to more students, children and family out there with more partners. If we have 17 partners today, can we increase that to maybe 27 the next time round? Each with their core competency coming together and work collaboratively. And at the same time, at the leadership level, we gain new insight, new knowledge, and new competency in how to be a collaborative leader. And for that, thank you very much, everybody.